The debate, though, about numbers also needs to be had honestly. First thing, after the pandemic, net overseas migration was always going to go up. Always going to go up. It was going to go up for two reasons. First of all, a whole lot of people who'd been waiting to come here were all going to come at once. Student visas, for example. First year, second year, third year students who'd left were all going to come in the same year. There was always going to be an increase in net overseas migration. But also everybody who was coming, overwhelmingly, some still had life left on their old visa, but a whole lot of people who were coming post-pandemic got a new visa. So the expiry dates were pushed out. So we had a situation where normally you get a natural overlap of expiry dates of a similar amount coming up each year, and we had a series of years where that didn't happen, which obviously has a huge impact on a net figure. That's not to say that there weren't areas that needed to be addressed. But if you want to have the conversation about net overseas migration, you do need to say where we need to address them. The government did exactly that, and we did that with respect to student visas, for a very simple reason. International education, a really important industry for Australia, but one of the only industries in Australia, one of the only ones where you need to provide a new home for every customer. That's unusual. And so what had happened for some of our educational institutions was they were not pulling their weight in terms of student housing. They weren't. And so we've set up a system now where as different institutions do more with respect to student housing, they will be able to get more students, but they can no longer feel that they can completely outsource that responsibility to the general housing market. That's not a reasonable business model for international education. That has had an impact on net overseas migration, what we've done there, but that's what you need to do. And if the opposition want to say they need to get net overseas migration down faster than the 40% drop that the government's already done, there needs to be a discussion not simply about what's the total, but what's the visa class? What's the visa class where you're going to do it? If I start now, a whole lot of focus on the permanent migration numbers actually doesn't get you very far. A huge portion of the permanent migration numbers go to people who are already here, who move from temporary visas to permanent visas, have no impact on net overseas migration. A lot of the ones who come from overseas are partner visas, who have very little impact on housing because they're partners. They're not just in the same house, they're in the same room. You need to work out, if you want to argue we need to go harder than what the government's doing, to answer the question where. In terms of saying that we need to restore manufacturing, it's a simple case. The story of Australian manufacturing and the story of labour of workers on visas has been the same story for the history of Australian manufacturing. In terms of other occupations, last year 21,000 visas for healthcare workers, 4,300 visas for teachers, 15,524 for construction. We've tripled the number of visas that we're giving for construction. If these are the areas where people want to cut, then they need to explain which hospitals they're going to say don't have to fill every shift, which education providers won't be teaching the full range of subjects anymore, which construction projects they are willing to wait longer for, including housing projects, if we're not going to have the labour we need to get them built. If they want to turn up for that argument, I am there. But to have the argument about total numbers without saying where you want to cut is spin without any substance at all. The simple question of where is something that my political opponents haven't wanted to deal with, but there is no pathway of being an alternative party of government unless you have that conversation.
Thank you, Minister. Just jumping on your invitation for an honest conversation about NOM. So you note that migration has dropped by 40%, but it's also true that the NOM that's coming has consistently exceeded Treasury forecasts, and Treasury has regularly revised up its forecast for NOM. There were indications from your government around 2023 that it was aiming for pre-pandemic levels of NOM, but that hasn't happened, and some expert analysis suggests that it won't. Given the many challenges in the workforce that Australia is facing, aged care being a very prescient example, can you outline what you think is the appropriate NOM level and the appropriate rate of population growth going forward for Australia, why that is and how you plan to get there?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, there is a limitation that will always be there on the predictability of net overseas migration. And that is because it is a combination of levers which are within the control of government and levers that are not controlled by government. The classic one that is not controlled by government is the behaviour of Australian citizens leaving and returning. At the moment, one of the drivers of net overseas migration is the weakness of some of the economy in some of the countries that Australians often go to work. I remember when I was Minister for Population back in, 2010, at that time there'd been a huge spike and a lot of it was driven by following the global financial crisis. A whole lot of Australians returned home. So I think we need to be honest when you started, Natasha, with the question about predictions being wrong. There are parts of this which are not within the gift of government to be able to predict. There are parts of it which are completely within our control. So I start with this. The challenge in terms of total numbers, there is a real intersection at the moment that the community is deeply feeling by housing shortage. And we need to make sure that we are continuing just to curtail net overseas migration and to bring it down while we are improving housing supply. If we go too hard, we will in fact reduce our capacity to improve housing supply, or we will mean that farmers won't be able to get working holiday workers and farm workers, or we would have a situation where our aged care system went into collapse. So there is an issue. For me, the big moving part is as housing comes online. That's effectively a huge part of this. The second thing that will be a driver of net overseas migration, that will be a pressure upwards, will be AUKUS. There are going to be really significant high-paying jobs that a lot of Australians will move to, and we will need to make sure that the jobs they are going to are still backfilled. Some of that might be done by Australians moving up a little bit, but I have no doubt there's going to be some situation, particularly in South Australia and Western Australia, where AUKUS as a driver of employment is going to create new situations. So I won't give you a magic number. I don't think there is a magic number. NOM provides useful information as a guide, and its predictability will always be uncertain because of the behaviour of Australian citizens. Doesn't mean you stop predicting it, but I think we need to be honest about the limitations there.
What about like a general rate of population growth when it comes to migration?
Well, as I say, for me, the critical point there is how are we going with housing stock? That's a critical point. If we'd got our housing legislation through 2 years earlier than we did last term, when both the Green Party and the Coalition blocked it in the Senate for all that time, it means we are already years behind on our housing policy, 2 years behind. Claire O'Neill's doing an incredible job getting things moving again. But I think the principle you start with is not a magic number. The principle you need to start with is making sure that our immigration system is tailored to the needs of the nation. That's the principle. And there'll be a few moving parts with that. Housing is an important one. Labour shortage and skills is an important one. We need to make sure in tailoring it to the needs of the nation, we create a situation where we don't put too much pressure on our infrastructure and housing, but we also want to make sure we don't inadvertently cause other parts of the economy that Australians rely on to effectively collapse.
Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. I just want to pick up on part of your answer to Natasha, where you...
Natasha, I said your name wrong. I apologise.
Where you mentioned that AUKUS will be one of the factors putting upward pressure on migration. The state premiers this week, including Roger Cook from WA, but also Peter Malinauskas in South Australia and Jacinta Allen in Victoria have talked about the cuts to the state-nominated visa places, and particularly in WA and South Australia, the state governments there are concerned about AUKUS and about getting tradies to build houses for the people who come here because of AUKUS. This is, I think, the second or third year that Roger Cook has raised these concerns about the setting of places in this part of the visa system. Is it perhaps time to re-look at those state-nominated places and how that system works?
Yeah, I'm having discussions with my department on exactly this at the moment. The first thing I'll say with the Western Australian example, I think it's not a bad one, where the number of applications they were able to put in has not historically been matching the number of visas they've in fact got. So what's being talked about as though it were a cut is not in fact a reduction from what the real life experience had ended up being. That said, the issue of making sure that we have a system that is fit for purpose, it is reasonable to describe there being quite a different employment market in each state. And AUKUS will accentuate that. The issues of AUKUS, I haven't met with Premier Cook on it, but I have met with Premier Malinauskas, who's raised exactly these concerns. So the issue of should we be having a conversation about whether or not there's a different way of doing this, I think that is the right conversation to have, but we're early in that part of it.
Well, we appreciate your time today, being generous with it. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the Manuka Bitcoin ATM that's popped up and see where it holds. But here's a membership for the club for our thanks as well. Tony, great. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please thank the Minister.
Thank you.
There you go. Welcome back anytime.
No, good, because